hear you because you're muted, but okay. I know you're out there somewhere in the great big world. So okay, everybody, welcome. And thanks for tuning in. We are living in very, very exciting and pressurized times. So for those of you who are here in Israel and you made it in, if you're on other flights, I'm not sure when we'll see you, but we're all obviously enthralled and I don't know what words to use by all the latest breaking news. This is never a dull place to be. As you know, we're going to, I think, say a special tefillah of thanks, Mizmor LeTodah, when near the end of our broadcast today. But we hope that the nation and the people will stay safe, and we will continue to achieve the kind of human technical miracles that we have been witnessing over the last few days. We are going to talk tonight, among other subjects, and it's a bit controversial, so I'll tell you that right from the get-go, about the concept of violence. Well, there are two types of violence. One is the violence that comes from war, and this is a violence that the Torah understands is, for better or worse, a part of human nature. People fight, nations fight, and we have to fight when it's time to fight. We were told that from the beginning. Who was the first Jew? Abraham. And one of the first major events in Abraham's life is that he went to war in this famous and very mysterious battle of the 4 kings versus the 5 kings. And he actually turns the tide and wins that war. So we see right from the very beginning that war is just a byproduct of different human beings on the same planet. So we see that Yaakov also participates in a war. Yitzchak is the only one. He's a pacifist. He doesn't. And this is something that has been part and parcel of Jewish history from the very beginning, and certainly all through Tanakh. David HaMelech was a great general, and without listing all the great people who were part of the war effort, and we always had an army. This is just, I mean, v'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, that we left armed, and the simple explanation is we took weapons in case we would have to fight a war, which we did more than once. And thank God, generally we were successful, not always, but we fought wars. And the Torah understands that this is part of the global experience, and we just have to accept it. What does the Torah say? Ki tetzei lamilchama aleivecha, when you go out to war against your enemy. And the rabbis ask, well, it's kind of funny. The rabbis ask, not really so funny, but the rabbis ask, why does it say when you shall go to war against your enemies? Who else are you going to fight? Your friends? Unfortunately, we do often fight our friends, but the rabbis didn't foresee it like that. And they said, no, it seems superfluous. What does it say when you go to war on your enemy? So one of the commentaries is that when you go to war against an enemy, you have to look upon your enemy as your enemy, meaning that although our tendency is to be rachamim ben rachamim, merciful people who tend to go easy, and it's very difficult for us to show that kind of very intense, strident ability to wage war. We have to do so. And we have to almost psych ourselves into saying, this is our God-given task and mission when the time comes for it, wage war and do it to the best of our abilities. And although we have rules of war, what we have kept to this day have called Tahora Neshek, purity of arms, nevertheless, we know that sometimes it is wrong to have mercy. And even in our Parsha, the Sedras of this week, this is something Moshe gets angry when in the fight against Midian, they let certain people live, the women live, even though they were certainly culpable. And Moshe gets very angry. He says, you let the women live. They were also supposed to be targeted, not always and not every war, but in this war, yes. So in any case, that's one kind of violence, and that violence is something which the Torah accepts as a given, and we have rules for it. But there is another type of violence, and that's what I'm going to talk about a bit more, and that is the kind of violence that associates with crime and acts of violence, and that obviously is something that we have to try to find a solution for. That we're not talking about war, we're talking about when people act in violent fashion against other people, and the Torah tries to warn us that this is something which will be dealt with severely, and it's something we have to try to eradicate from our midst. And therefore, the Torah has a lot of discussion in this week's Parsha about what to do about those who are guilty of manslaughter. Could be womanslaughter, but we call it manslaughter because it's usually men who are committing the acts of violence, not always ladies. We know that. But we have a lot of very strict laws against manslaughter. And we have set up 6 cities of refuge to where those who commit a violent crime of manslaughter can flee to in order to be safe and under guard, where they, if it was involuntary manslaughter, we're not talking about murder, we're talking about the Gemara gives the examples of somebody who's chopping a tree and the wood separates from the metal and the metal end of the axe flies and kills someone, or somebody shooting an arrow at hunting an animal and misfires and the arrow kills somebody. They didn't mean to kill anyone, so it's involuntary. Nevertheless, there is an element of negligence that they commit, and so they have to be punished. If they would be guilty of murder, they would be tried and executed. They can't go completely free because they, again, committed some form of negligence and they took a life, and there has to be a consequence for that. And so they would go to one of these cities of refuge. The rabbis do note, by the way, that some of the people who go, these were not only involuntary or any kind of manslaughters living in those cities. They were designated as such, but there were other people living there as well. But some of the people who went there as manslaughterers, involuntary, may actually have committed a crime that would be qualified as murder. They would qualify as murder, but there wasn't enough evidence against them. There were not witnesses and all the other things that go into convicting somebody of murder, which is a capital crime. And so say the rabbis, they may have been mixed together with those who were purely involuntary. So there are a lot of people, or a lot, it's hard to know exactly. We don't have records of how many were sent there, but there is a bit of a mixture of those who were there for involuntary and voluntary manslaughter. And they are confined to barracks, so to speak, without getting into all the details, until the death of the Kohen Gadol. It's kind of a strange idea, but the sense of when a Kohen Gadol dies, there's a national trauma. So these people who were not actually convicted of murder, we're trying to save them from their next of kin, who would have this almost instinctive desire to take vengeance upon them. So we protect them. But when there is a national crisis like the Kohen Gadol passing away, the country would be in a state where no one would want to contribute to this sense of loss by going after somebody who, again, committed an involuntary murder. But I want to talk about this whole issue, get into a little get into it a little bit deeper about the idea of violence and where it's coming from, and quite an amazing statement that Rashi makes. We know the story of what happens. We're actually going to touch upon two stories here. The first one in Matot, in the first of our double Sedra, talks about this famous dispute between Moshe and 2.5 tribes who petition to live on the other side of the Jordan, Transjordan, or east of the Yarden River, because ostensibly it's a fertile place, it's a fertile land. There are all kinds of opinions as to why they wanted to do that. Some people even say they had this vision that Moshe would be buried on that side of the Jordan, and they wanted to be close to him. Okay, without getting into that, but Moshe makes this very dramatic statement to them. He takes, on behalf of the nation, he takes this offense and he says to them, you want to live apart from everybody else? That's really not appropriate. He says, and he gives this very caustic statement, something we're hearing about quite a lot in Israel today, being repeated over and over. Your brothers are going to go out to war and you're going to stay here. You're going to sit here while they do the fighting. And Moshe is very upset about this. And they ultimately come and they're going to make an accommodation. Now, this very, I think I've mentioned this before, something that's very special and memorable for me, because I remember as a student in the yeshiva back in Skokie, Illinois, that one day, just before the Bein HaZmanim, actually just before, as we are now, before Tisha B'Av, the reading of this Parsha, and the dean of our yeshiva, Rabbi Dr. Joseph Babad, from a very distinguished genealogy of great scholars. Babad stands for Ben Av Beit Din, and a number of his ancestors who wrote Sfarim. In any case, he was the dean of the yeshiva. He called everyone to come to a special meeting. I remember coming to the auditorium there. It was unusual. We didn't know what it was about. And we sat down there, the entire yeshiva, the entire student body, and he announced us, and he said in a very almost tearful, poignant way, he said, every year, now he, of course, he was a Holocaust survivor. He came from Germany, came to America, and he had a distinguished career there. But he said to us, every year when I come to this week's Parsha and I read these words, will your brothers in Israel, will they go to war and you will remain here? He said, I say to myself, how can I leave my brothers in Israel and not contribute in some way and be with them? And he said, year after year, I kind of torment myself when I hear these words. And so he said, I have decided that I'm leaving the yeshiva and I am finally going to make aliyah. Now, he was already at an advanced age. I don't know exactly how old he was. I want to say he was elderly, but today that phrase means less than it used to. So let's just say he was probably somewhere around my age. And he did indeed go to Israel. He lived, I think, at least another 20 years in Israel. And other members of his family came as well. And it made a deep impression upon me when I heard him tell that about himself. And I think that was really when I made an internal decision. And I said, I'm going to come to Israel someday as well. It didn't happen for a while, but Baruch Hashem, this actually in our Hebrew calendar, tomorrow is the 32nd anniversary. It's our Aliyah anniversary, the 32nd anniversary of our coming to Israel. Ken Yirbu Baruch Hashem. In any case, so this pasuk And this Parsha is very sentimental, very special for me. So they make an accommodation whereby Reuven, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe, these 2.5 tribes, Moshe allows them, okay, you have permission, you can live Transjordan, but you're going to have to join the fight. We're now going to be, Moshe did not make it into Israel, but he says, the collective we are going to have to fight when we come into Israel. We know that there are 7 nations living there, and we need all hands on deck. We need everybody to fight, including you. And you're going to join the army. You're going to fight with everybody else. And when the battle is over and the land is conquered, you can go back and live on the other side of the Jordan. And that's exactly what happens. That's what they do. And they fight together with the other 9.5 Shvatim. And as we know, they defeat the nations. And then they're able to go back and live on their side of the Yarden. As a postscript, I would say although they received permission from Moshe, nevertheless, it still was a bit traumatic for the country to have a breakaway. I know we Jews love breakaway minyanim, breakaway countries. And so in a sense, Mida Keneged Mida, these 2.5 tribes will be the first ones who will be exiled by Assyria. When the 10 tribes are lost, they will be the first of those tribes to be conquered and sent off by Assyria and scattered in different nations. But later on in the second Parsha, we talk about the creation of these 6 cities of refuge. And they're delineated. 3 of them are on the west side of the Yarden. 3 of them are on the east side. And Rashi brings out the natural question, why do you need 3 of these cities? By the way, 2 of those cities we know, and there's still today cities that have a lot of murderers in them. One is Shechem, Nablus, and the other is Hebron, without getting into that. But they were among the 6 cities. But 3 of them that were west of the Yarden. So Rashi brings the question, why did you need 3 for 9.5 tribes and 3 for 2.5 tribes? That doesn't seem right. How come it's a preponderance of cities of refuge for involuntary murderers on one side as opposed to the other? So Rashi brings this and he answers and he says, even though it's not split up equally, 9.5 to 2.5. It nevertheless turns out equal. Mishum de Begilad nafishe rotzchim, because, and he even brings a pasuk from Hosea, among the population of Gilad, which is where they lived, which is what that area was called, there were a preponderance of murderers, says Rashi. So this really is a very puzzling concept. Why should there be more murderers there? So one of the answers that's offered is, well, the fathers left their homes and left their families to go over to the other side of the Yarden. Maybe this was they didn't want to live with everybody else. Was it a punishment? Well, they did their part of the deal. They crossed the Jordan. They fought with their brothers in arms in order to win the land. So they didn't, in the end, they kept their part of the bargain. So are they being punished? In fact, say the commentators, they not only fought against those nations together with their compatriots for 7 years, they stayed another 7 years until the land was finally apportioned. And only after 14 years did they return to their homes and rejoin their families. So they even went me'alu me'aver in order to not just keep the deal that Moshe made with them, but to stay even longer. So are they such bad people that there's a preponderance of murderers among them? So I heard a very brilliant commentary on this question and this issue by Rabbi Yochanan Zweig from Florida. And he says that they did keep their part of the bargain. The problem was that they left their families for 14 years. Their children grew up without a father figure in the house. And the result of that was disastrous. That without some strong father figure type to teach them right from wrong and to punish them if they screwed up, if they erred, they ended up, in a sense, taking a very lackadaisical approach towards protecting human life. They didn't quite have the same moral standard and perspective on value of life that they would have had they had a complete nuclear family of mother and father. And lacking a father, this for 14 years, that's how they grew up. So however old they were at the moment, if they were 3, 4, 5 years old, now they're 16, 17, 18, 19 with no father figure. And the result was that they just weren't as careful about others and as maybe caring about others. And the result was that a lot of these accidents happen, these involuntary manslaughter incidents that characterizes them in a very caustic way, not as killers by intent, but more, again, just taking it too easy and not being strong and careful enough about protecting the welfare of others. And just to kind of illustrate how true this can be, we have a very striking, unfortunately, a very striking model to look after without any, I'm not trying in any way of any shred of racism, but just quoting the reality. In America, approximately 12.5% of the population is Black. And yet, 55.9% of all murders in America are committed by African Americans. And Blacks are twice as likely as whites to spend time in jail. And among the youth, 52% of all juvenile violent crime arrests are by Blacks, despite the fact that they have, as we said before, less than 13% of the population. Because the other factor we have to put into the equation is that between 50 and 67% of Black children are born into a single parent household. So you're looking at as much as 60% of those children not having a father figure. And you see what comes from that. There are other factors as well, other things. The odds of getting a college degree are 70% higher when a child has two parents, a mother and a father living with them. And that has also certainly affected the number, the percentage of Blacks who go into college. What happens, and Blacks are twice as likely to spend time in jail as whites. So all of these statistics, they're very striking and they're very telling, but here you can, and obviously there are many, many sociologists who have connected these dots in a very almost unanimous agreement that not having the father figure at home, being raised by a single parent, has very serious consequences for that child. Many, if not most of the boys will join a gang, looking for that father figure type of experience. They'll join a gang. They'll be subject to tremendous peer pressure. There'll be this competition. You have rivalry in families, but not the kind of rivalry you see in gangs, where you have to be tougher, and in many ways, you have to be more violent and more extreme in order to survive and certainly to advance in the gang. And the percentage of lawful employment in gangs is very, very low. Drugs are rampant, etc. And that's the environment that in which these young people live. And so we understand what Rashi is trying to tell us here without getting into commentary on some of the contemporary innovations in raising children and one-parent families, etc. But Rashi makes it clear that at least we can say that a more perfect family environment consists of mother and father, each of whom contributes in a very serious way, and not having one of them definitely has repercussions on the child. The child may grow up to be a wonderful, special, kind, merciful, intelligent human being, but the odds are going against them. And this is what Rashi is referring to when he says, in that side of the Jordan, these families did not have a father for 14 years, and therefore they were not as careful and they were not as clear about how strict you have to be in guarding your life and the lives of others. And consequently, more of these types of murders and accidents happened, and there was a necessity to have a preponderance of these arei miklat, these cities of refuge there. So I think it's very interesting food for thought that we have to try to the best of our ability to see that we have those kinds of families. We have to work so as to solve the singles issue, the difficulty in both in Israel and outside of Israel, especially for young women to find a basher, to find a husband within the Jewish community, and to work together to raise children, and how important that can be, and a lot of the other problems that spring from it. So yes, I know that there are all kinds of variations in the families today, but it seems the Torah is being crystal clear that that would be the optimum. And I think most people would agree, regardless of their situation, that yes, that would be the optimum thing, and is something that we should work towards. So it's hidden in a sense within the Parsha, but clearly it's sending a very, very strong message on the value and the intrinsic necessity to have a strong family upbringing, and to raise children with as much strength and as much cooperation as possible. So I want to come back, and we said that we don't really outwardly rejoice when our enemies fall. This is the famous statement by Rav Shmuel Akatan bin Pol, O yivcha al tismach. When your enemy falls, do not rejoice. There's a Hasidic, a Yiddish saying, when your enemy falls, do not rejoice, but you don't have to help him up either. So I forget the exact Yiddish words for it, but we certainly are cognizant that Hashem is certainly giving us chizuk when we are able to identify and eliminate enemies wherever they are, whoever they are, and that sends a chilling message, hopefully, to them that if they cross the line, we can and will get them. And that is something which we have to thank Hashem for. So I want to recite the Tehillah of thanks, first of all. Mizmor l'todah, hariu l'Adonai kol haaretz, ivdu et Adonai b'simcha, ba'u lefanav birnana. De'u ki Adonai hu Elohim, hu asanu, v'lo anachnu, amo b'tzon marito, ba'u sha'ara b'todah, chatzerotav b'tilah, hodu lo baruch shemo, ki tov Adonai li'olam chasdo, v'ador v'ador emunato. For God's kindness to us, his goodness, is something that is eternal from generation to generation. We will be faithful to him. And we'll add the Mishaberach for Tzahal. Mishaberach Avotenu Abraham Yitzchak V'Yakov V'Yivarech Et Chayalei Tzva Haganah Yisrael Omdim Al Mishmar Tzenu Barei Eloheinu Migvul HaLevanon Ad Vibar Mitzrayim Min Hayam HaGadol Ad Levo HaRava B'Yabasha B'Avira V'Yam Yitein Adonai Toivenu Akamim Aleinu Nigafim Lifneihem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishmor v'yatzil et chayaleinu mikol tzara b'tzukah, mikol nego machala, v'yishlach bracha v'atzlacha b'chol ma'aseh yedehem, yadbir son'enu tachtehem, v'yitreim b'chet Yeshua v'yiter nitzachon, v'kuyam b'hem hakatuv, ki Adonai Elohechem, olechim lechem lilachem lechem imoy bechem l'shei etchem, v'nomar amen. So to everybody, we want to wish everybody safety. And Am Yisrael should be strong and safe, and we should have an end to this conflict, a successful end. And Be'ezrat Hashem, the hostages will come back, and the wounded will heal. So to everybody, Shabbat Shalom. Next week, same time, same place. We're approaching Tisha B'Av, and so we'll have some special words to say about that. Shabbat Shalom. Wishing everybody Besorot Tovot, Yeshuot, V'Nechamot. Thank you to Yossi for hosting as always.